Welcome to the Christian Atheist, episode 13, Responding to the Critic, part 2. Max Doubt claims that the Bible is full of, quote, false history in the next segment of his argument. He says this: the sciences of Egyptology and Palestinian archaeology have reached a consensus. Ancient Israel was never in Egypt, so no 10 plagues. No exodus, no wanderings, and no conquest of Canaan. The first Israelites were Canaanites. He goes on to claim that I am an ignoramus in comparison to his own enlightened understanding of things. If Wise has studied the Bible, then he must know that most of the stories were written long after the supposed events, and those characters who are not completely fictional are mainly propaganda props. Is Wise familiar with the documentary hypothesis or the synoptic problem? I doubt it, but these have been the main focus of real biblical scholarship for over a century. Here is the Christian Atheist's reply, expanded and revised for presentation here. Foolish and inadequate as I am enough of a philosopher and logician to sense grandiose and arrogant claims to knowledge concerning, quote, real biblical scholarship and, quote, consensus that cloud clear thinking. You, Max, would be much more effective and difficult to dismiss as a critic if you didn't feel the need to constantly overstate your position. You are correct that there is, as I understand it, no direct archaeological evidence of the Hebrews in Egypt. Fair enough. Let me help you a bit. It is possible, given this lack of evidence, that the Exodus and subsequent narrative is entirely fictional. This is a reasonable conclusion from the archaeological evidence. Mere possibility from a lack of evidence, though, is not a good claim to positive knowledge about something, especially when you start by excluding and denying the one source of evidence to the contrary. Atomic structure had no evidence either until the evidence was found. As we learn more, I may be willing to concede your conclusion on this topic, but a basic rule of inductive logic is that absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. And leaping to a conclusion, even in the face of good but thin reason, is not good policy. Intellectual humility is in quite short supply in today's hyper-partisan world, but appeals to ignorance remain informal fallacies, and mumbling incantations like consensus of opinion and real biblical scholarship don't change the facts or the logic. Given what appears to be an historical presentation, one may be justified in provisionally accepting its truth. That is, given no good reason to disbelieve the biblical narrative, one may be justified in believing it. And even as doubt is entertained, it is best to withhold judgment rather than pass it arrogantly for purposes of promoting one's own agenda. Apparently, you, Max, would have been one of those experts who declared the Bible, which is a primary text for historians to study for evidence about the ancient world, as are the ancient Greek manuscripts, Egyptian documentary evidence, etc. You would have called these utterly ridiculous for speaking of a Hittite empire, only to have it discovered in the late 19th and early 20th century by archaeology. Egg on face for those experts. Or perhaps also the story of Heinrich Schliemann is noteworthy here. The consensus of opinion among the archaeological community was that the stories of the Trojan War and Mycenae were entirely fictional, mythological, and that it was a fool's errand to look for them, until Heinrich Schliemann, a dilettante and self-made archaeologist, found them in the late 19th century. Pretensions to wisdom and knowledge, besides being foolish, can be dangerous, as you are often not just making a mistake, but carrying others over the precipice with you. Unlike you, Max, I am not willing to claim that Atlantis never existed simply because as yet it hasn't been found. I am willing, though, to entertain both possibilities, its reality and its falsity, until I know better. It was Socrates who most clearly taught the dangers of arrogant claims to knowledge. In my youth, I disliked him intensely, but as I've matured, his wisdom justifies the title Father of Philosophy. We would do well in our age to follow his lead more carefully. If the Bible is as full of false history as you maintain, then there should be a definitive expose displaying its clear violation of what we in fact know about history, not what we think we know. Where are the examples of flagrant anti-historicalism that would justify such a claim as that which you make here? Again, in order to prove a desired point, you overstate your position, making yourself appear foolish. What is truly amazing is that the Bible has largely withstood the onslaught of modern historical scholarship. Again, I am no expert here, so I am willing to learn more. But I'm a lifelong student of such things, and to date, I am struck far more by what the Bible is than by what it is not. As to the documentary hypothesis, at first you threw me for a loop on this one, as in my day we called it higher criticism. But yes, I am familiar with it, and with the, quote, synoptic problem, neither of which present much threat to accepting the Bible as it stands. The same sort of critical lens is placed on William Shakespeare, denying that he wrote his plays, which seems to me utterly preposterous, and also to many other serious Shakespeare scholars. There is value in seeking to look at historical works in this way, but it is, again, one possible view, and such historical reconstructions remain working postulates that may, or may not, be getting at something true. That the Genesis account, for instance, is a compendium of stories of disparate origin seems obvious to me, but doesn't effectively argue against the meaning and power of the text. And the synoptic problem is not really a problem at all. Why should we care that Matthew, Mark, and Luke shared a common literary source? What difference does that make? The text is still the text. Again, in this process, you utter a magical term that is supposed to make it clear that anyone who believes the Bible is an ignoramus. But calling the higher criticism and the synoptic problem, quote, the main focus of real biblical scholarship, does not make your case stronger in the least. I might well say that real archaeologists wouldn't waste their time looking for Troy and Mycenae. And that was the consensus of the scholarly archaeological community, another magical term meant to silence dissent. But their discovery isn't any less real as a result. Max goes on. God is credited with condoning, commanding, and committing the killings of over 2 million men, women, children, and babies. And that's only where specific numbers are mentioned. So we're not counting the flood, the 10 plagues, and many other plagues and punishments, and most of the cities genocided by Joshua and his berserker army under God's command. Of course, none of that is historical. The problem for believers is only a problem if it is historical, right? Otherwise, these are just stories, useful fictions. I'm willing to entertain that possibility along with you as a possibility, Max. But I would make the case that the power and wisdom of the Bible remains, even if they are fictions. As to the problem, though, I too struggle with this issue. It is another of those with which an honest faith must grapple. There are easy answers for commanded genocide, God's sovereignty over his creation, for example. But they should not easily salve us. We are taught by the Bible itself that human life is sacred, that each of us possesses the spark of the divine. We are forbidden to arbitrarily take human life, told to treat others as we want to be treated. A defensive war is one thing. But as you suggest, Max, the wars of conquest by Joshua and other like circumstances and figures, and the subsequent genocidal actions should be troubling at the very least. And I can understand why this issue would forbid faith for many. It was one of the issues that I felt deeply in turning away from God, and one that whispered in my ear as I returned. How can God do these sorts of things? I, at least, have no easy answers for this question. Choosing God does not mean you have to have all the answers in place. For me, I look steadily at the Lord Jesus, and then I trust that these other issues, even really tough and intractable ones, have an answer. The times, for sure, were different, and the value of human life was held much more cheaply than today. And then I think of Hitler and Stalin and socialist ideology and practice in the history of the 20th century, and perhaps no more cheaply after all. Lastly, Max complains of the New Testament's doctrine of salvation by faith. He says this: "But all that Old Testament mayhem and butchery is nothing compared to the New Testament doctrine of eternal torture, not for anything you did, but merely for how you believed or failed to believe. Even those who never heard of God, Jesus, or the Bible, as Paul says in Romans, they are without excuse." Ugh. Max's final issue, too, is a serious one. It bothered me deeply as a Christian, and I spent years agonizing over it, wrestling with God. The resolution of this issue was nothing short of a theological revolution for me, and the reverberations of my embrace of that revolution cannot be overstated. This answer is implicit as a foundation on which my faith stands post-Looking Glass, on an acceptance of tension and paradox that used to militate against faith in God for me. First, though, to correct a theological issue, faith has always been the path to God. This is not unique to the New Testament. For the Christian, Old Testament saints too depended upon Christ's sacrifice, as, quote, "It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins," Hebrews 10:4. The purpose of the law was to display human sin clearly, and to point humanity to God as the sole source of cleansing and hope. To point, ultimately, to the once-for-all sacrificial work of the incarnate Son of God. The sacrificial system was designed to display the utter inadequacy of human beings to meet the demands of a just and holy God. Human beings, then, are condemned precisely for what they do, for their failure to live up to the righteousness of God. Faith, trust, belief in God is both a recognition of our own inadequacy and an acknowledgement of God's supremacy, our need, and His provision. Faith is a matter of dependence, not mere intellectual assent, of action as well as thought. It is one of the most complex and difficult concepts in human thought, and I don't think that any of us have adequately plumbed its depths. I certainly have not, and I have spent years seeking to understand the nature of faith. It is another of those divine human paradoxes we confront in considering our relationship with our Creator. When Paul says in Romans that we are without excuse, he is alluding to human awareness of our own sin and to an innate notion of God. I have dealt with this issue in the Christian Atheist number 8 on Jean-Paul Sartre. This passage suggests that God holds us accountable to whatever light we have been given. And if we have not heard of Jesus or the Bible, we are not summarily condemned for not believing in Christ. But we are still accountable to respond in faith to the light given to us. and none of us are without light. And there are two paradigmatic responses to God's light, that of Cain and that of Abel. It is this last sentence that was my theological revolution. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Genesis 18:25. I could trust God to do the right thing, even when the doctrines of systematic theology or the words of the Bible itself confused me. God cannot be boxed. C.S. Lewis, as always, was eons ahead of me on this point. He declares of Aslan, the Christ figure, he'll be coming and going. One day you'll see him, and another you won't. He doesn't like being tied down. It's quite all right. He'll often drop in, only you mustn't press him. He's wild, you know, not like a tame lion. This, too, is a matter of trust. God will do what is right, no matter what our expectations or our theological boxes may demand. Lewis makes a further suggestion in The Last Battle that allowed for me to put this matter to rest. I know not God's mind on this matter, and I make no pretensions to. But these words bring tears to my eyes, joy to my heart, and encourage faith in my God. Emeth, a Calormene, enemy of Narnia in battle, and follower of the false god Tash, speaks of finding Aslan after passing through the stable door, and unknowingly into Aslan's country. Emeth says this: his hair was like pure gold, and the brightness of his eyes like gold that is liquid in the furnace. He was more terrible than the flaming mountain, and in beauty he surpassed all that is in the world. Then I fell at his feet and thought, surely this is the hour of death, for the lion will know that I have served Tash all my days, and not him. Nevertheless, it is better to see the lion and die than to be Tisroc of the world and live and not to have seen him. But the glorious one bent down his golden head and touched my forehead with his tongue and said, Son, thou art welcome. But I said, Alas, Lord, I am no son of thine, but the servant of Tash. He answered, Child, all the service thou hast done to Tash, I count as service done to me. Lord, is it then true that thou and Tash are one? The lion growled so that the earth shook and said, It is false. Not because he and I are one, but because we are opposites. I take to me the service which thou hast done to him. For I and he are of such different kinds that no service which is vile can be done to me, and none which is not vile can be done to him. But I said also, For the truth constrained me, yet have I been seeking Tash all my days. Beloved, said the glorious one, unless thy desire had been for me, thou wouldst not have sought so long and so truly, for all find what they truly seek. It is Christ we seek when we search for truth. It is Christ whom we follow as we walk in the way. And it is life that we find as he reveals himself to us, and love for him overwhelms our being. If this is the first episode of The Christian Atheist that you've watched, please subscribe below to be sure not to miss any upcoming episodes, and to view those you've missed from our YouTube channel. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all three in this post.